name's Jo Twist. Welcome to this panel session. I have a fantastic panel here today, and I'm rather intimidated by the number of doctors on the panel around me. I am a former academic. I'm in recovery.
It's a long process.
It's taken about 15 years. I actually did a PhD on online communities, virtual communities, identity, and young people and social inclusion in the late 90s. And then I fell into journalism, and now I've ended up heading up a trade association which represents the video games and interactive entertainment industry. So I've been asked, we've supported a few of these research projects because we think it's an excellent idea to bring industry and academic research closer together. And I'm very pleased that off the back of the Next Gen Skills report, which was authored by Ian Livingstone, the living legend, I like to call him the poster boy for the games industry. He quite likes that. And Alex Hope from the video special effects industry, they wrote penned the Nesta report a few years ago, which kickstarted our own campaign, the Next Gen Skills campaign, to get computer science back onto the school curriculum, which is now done. But that's just, pre-alpha, we like to call it, in the games industry. But I'm really glad that, again, one of the recommendations from the report was that higher education researchers and the industry work more closely to bring together, not just in research and development aspects of the industry, but also in humanities and culture. Because I think it's very important. I sit, part of our job as a trade association is to create the right environment for businesses and games companies to compete on a global scale, because we are a massively huge economic powerhouse. But also, we tend to fall between two stools, which is quite unfortunate because no one quite understands what we are. And we are at that intersection between technology, innovation, and content and creativity and culture and social spaces. So for me, it's a challenge to try and help people understand the power, not just economically, but politically, socially, culturally, that games and interactive entertainment represent. I'm going to just give you a little bit of background about the industry very quickly, and then I'm going to ask my panel of experts to briefly introduce themselves, because I was going to do quick biogs of everyone and then realised we've only got an hour. And then they'll just talk a little bit about the projects that they're interested in. Then we'll open up to questions. I have a few questions myself, but I'd love to hear from the floor. So in case you don't know much about the games industry, the video games market in the UK alone is worth about 3.9 billion, and we consistently are increasing that value in terms of consumer spend. Globally, the industry is worth is expected to be worth by a couple of years' time about 87 billion, and that compares to about 28 billion for the recorded music industry. So lots of people don't realise we're actually faster growing and bigger than music and DVD. We consistently top the top-selling entertainment products of all time, GTA, Grand Theft Auto, which no one should be playing under 18, by the way. It broke all records, becoming this last year the fastest and biggest-selling entertainment product of all time. Around about 1 in 3 people in the UK play games regularly, about half male-female. 55 million hours of games a day are played in the UK alone. And the average age of someone who plays games, because gamer is not a particularly helpful term, someone who plays games, is about 33. The industry is as old as I am. 40. So we are quite young, but we've achieved a lot. So I am excited by the potential of this funded research and the various different projects that are going on. And so should the government. So the government, we're awaiting the tax breaks announcement for the industry, which should really help raise us on a level playing field economically. But the tax breaks are going to be granted from the European Commission on the basis of cultural grounds, which is very interesting. And in terms of the government's recognition of the industry, they do see games playing an important role in contributing to the promotion, the development and enhancement of British culture, although if you only read the Daily Mail, you wouldn't know that. And in terms of educational use, just before I did this job, I was a Commissioner for Education at Channel 4, and we spent our entire £6 million budget on games, because we were trying to reach 14 to 19-year-olds with soft skills like resilience and get them interested in issues that they wouldn't normally be interested in. One of the games, I believe, Sweatshop, one of my games, is being researched as part of one of these projects. So I'm extremely, and it was banned by Apple, by the way, because they didn't quite like the idea of a game about sweatshops. I wonder why. Right, so we have a fantastic panel, so I'm going to get started by asking Dr. Patrick Dickinson from the University of Lincoln, who's going to talk about performance and audience and movement-based digital games and the research that they're doing now. Oh, so that's my panel, by the way.
Yeah. Just be clicking to the slides. Thanks very much. So our network is titled Performance and Audience in Movement-Based Digital Games, which is it's a bit of a mouthful. We just call it Performance and Games, and it's really based on kind of two processes. The first of those is from a games perspective, is the development of movement-based interfaces and physical interfaces for games. So these kind of interfaces have been around for a few years, but they're getting a lot of traction and becoming very much embedded as part of the sort of standard landscape of game design and game platforms. So we're thinking about things particularly like Kinect, Microsoft Kinect, which is being sort of going through further revisions, and the miniaturization of that, embedding that in mobile devices and so forth. And the other kind of side of that is the ongoing and increasing appropriation by that same technology by performing artists. So people who are working in dance and performing arts are kind of taking things like Kinect and using that in their performance. So the idea really of our network is to bring together these two sort of communities who are using the same sort of technical platform to promote, obviously exchange, collaboration, leading to game design, but we see it very much as a kind of two-way platform, really, that's going between performance and games. So that's the kind of the premise of our network. We've got a number of partners involved in this. So I'm from the University of Lincoln, and quite a lot of the participants, key participants, are from the University of Lincoln. The co-investigator is Gabriella Giannacci, who's a professor of drama at the University of Exeter. We're also working with the University of Nottingham, with the Mixed Reality Lab at Nottingham, and that's based on existing relationship with Gabriella and Lincoln. So those three universities are kind of the key partners. Tiger are also a partner, and we have an international dimension in the form of a partner who are Arts Queensland. So they're also, Arts Queensland are also interested in the same kind of exchange and technological developments, both in performing arts and games. So what we're going to do over the next 12 months is to run this network, and it's going to comprise of three main events. So we're going to start this month with a workshop in Lincoln, which is going to be themed on movement-based interfaces. And then on the other side of the summer, when we get to September, we're going to send some people to Brisbane to do some work at the Brisbane Festival. And in October, they'll come back, and people come back from Brisbane, and we'll do another workshop in Nottingham, which will coincide with Game City. So that'll kind of tie everything up. Those are the main events that we're going to run. Within that kind of, I've kind of sort of described the sort of basic idea of the network. There are actually a couple of sort of sub-themes that we're looking at that are based on existing projects or pieces of work that various participants have been doing. So the first one is mobility in play. So Catherine Gerling, who's just joined the University of Lincoln, has been doing some work at the University of Saskatchewan on mobility impaired users, players, and how people who have limited mobility can participate in games using physical interfaces. Kind of slightly overlapping with perhaps Gregor's interest, we also have some work in visitor experience and games in curated public spaces. We're interested in interface. Interface is quite an important part of this. So the idea of sort of performance and games and curated spaces also introduces the idea of audiences and games and how audiences sort of can interact with players who are playing games and so forth. So we're looking at kind of technology and design around that. And also looking at physical play, so how we can integrate games technology with, for example, playground games. In terms of knowledge exchange, we've got some commercial kind of partners as well. So Microsoft are obviously quite interested in this because they're very much promoting Connect as a platform at the moment. So they've lent us one of the Connect 2s to use, and we'll be using that, and so on. We've got various other companies that are interested, of course, as well. And that's about it, really.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will come to questions after we've gone through each of the brief overviews of each of the projects. So I'd like to ask Dr. Scott Gaule from Manchester Metropolitan University to talk about the Games and Social Change project.
Okay, so my name's Scott Gaule. I'm based at Manchester Met University in the Institute for Health and Social Change. The premise of the network that I'm the lead investigator on is that there's been a kind of, I suppose, a groundswell of interest in terms of what games can do, and as a maturing sort of cultural and art form, there's a number of kind of games that have tried to participate in contemporary debates around social and political issues, and this is interesting, right? So that's kind of the premise of the network, to kind of explore this in some depth, bringing together a community of practice of academics interested in, I suppose, game design, but also the cultural side of it, like why these play forms, how do people access them, what do people make of them, alongside a number of designers and game makers. I had hopes that there would be...
Did the other slides not make it?
Yeah, some of my slides didn't make the cut, right? Okay. So I'll just name check some of the partners, really. So we've got Tilt Factor, a game lab based in Dartmouth College out in the States. The Centre for Digital Games and Play at Utrecht University. They're very much interested in looking at the kind of the increasing play aspects in culture and society. Diego de la Vega, who are a transmedia cooperative based out of Mexico, and they're very much based to the, part of the Otra Campagna, part of the Zapatista cultural movement. Leuphana University, the Larks are a pervasive games collective based in Manchester, who kind of like merge street theatre and political sort of comments. Alongside the Copenhagen Game Collective, who are kind of one of a number of kind of emergent independent game communities that kind of like focus on play as well as game making as well. So the key focus areas of the project are looking at kind of digital screen games, like a number of these sort of social commentary games that I mentioned before. I think one of the most kind of famous is September the 12th. I don't know if you've heard of it at all, but it's almost like it's a pick up and put down sort of game, which is probably akin to a political cartoon, that sort of thing. So we're interested in those sort of pieces, as well as others that sort of range into more investigative documentary style games. As well as kind of the games that are happening between screens as well, and in urban spaces, alternate reality games, that sort of thing as well. So there's a number of different sort of things that have sort of been developing in that sphere as well. And we're also interested in the kind of game collective movement, because I think it's really important that whilst there's an explicit focus on social commentary and politics, it kind of forgets that there's some really groovy, sexy things happening in game making and playing at the moment, to do with developing people's literacy around making games, and the game collective sort of cultures that spring up across the different metropoles around the world seem to be at the forefront of this, of kind of making game making accessible and pushing out games there that really do explore social boundaries. Okay, so just in terms of what we're actually going to do, the meat of the network is that we already had a conference stroke showcase in February, bringing together a lot of the partners and showcasing what they do. We've got networker events in Lufana in Germany in June, some collaborative artistic practice between the Larks and the Copenhagen Game Collective going on in Copenhagen and throughout the course of the network, as well as some game jams. I think I've bitten off more than I can chew, really, with this network. But this is what we promised, anyhow. And culminating with a festival next March or April, probably akin to some of the ones that are sort of you can see out and about on your travels around the world, like a Woot in Copenhagen, or come out and play, that sort of thing. So maybe sort of a mix between serious academic talks and street games, pervasive games, that sort of thing. I think I've said enough.
Thank you. I mean, I'm particularly interested in this one just because it's very close to my heart, and I think America and particularly Scandinavian nations are probably slightly ahead of us in terms of how we treat games for change. So I'd be interested to dig deeper into that. Dr. Helen Kennedy is from the University of Brighton. So if you would just like to explain your project, Creative Territories.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe, and thanks for that introduction to the background of the games industry in the UK, which is very much sort of the backdrop to this particular project. So I'm Helen Kennedy. I'm the co-investigator on this project. The principal investigator is Patrick Krogan, who's based at the University of the West of England, located in the Digital Cultures Research Centre, who are also part of the big React hub that you might have seen showcased. So just to give you a sense of the context within which this work is taking place, a research centre that's looking at kind of culture, value, networks, etc., and also has this understanding of the sort of small, medium-sized enterprise and the micro-businesses that make up the creative economy. I'm based at the University of Brighton. We have another partner, Joost Raysens, at the University of Utrecht, and we have, as part of our core collaboration, the Bristol Games Hub that's represented here in the room by Thomas Rawlings, that's a not-for-profit in Bristol that's sort of key to some of the questions that we're going to be asking as part of our network. I used to be the president of the Digital Games Research Association, just stood down back in September. Just when this little scheme was launched at the AHRC, I was just in the final processes of putting together the conference that was taking place in Atlanta for that association. And one of the real sadnesses that was happening was that a lot of UK academics were withdrawing from the conference due to lack of funding. So when this call came out, it was very exciting for me to see that finally the AHRC were going to put a spotlight on games, because many of us working in games research sort of felt like there weren't really the people in the peer review college or the real advocates for games research. And now, of course, through this scheme, there'll be loads of them. So that's fantastic. So what are we doing? So our project is called Creative Territories, and you see here that what we're looking to do is to formulate and map forward the processes and connections that represent commercially viable, creatively sustainable, and culturally valuable pathways for the development of the growing UK indie game sector. That's such a mouthful. But I guess what we're looking for, what we're interested in, are the conditions of emergence that enable sort of clusters of independence to come together, where it becomes a kind of viable hub of activity through which to be a bit more self-sustaining. Because one of the things that we know is that there's a lot of expertise in tiny little units of organisation, and how does bringing those together, or them coming together, enable them to be a bit more sustainable. What we're particularly interested in is the ways in which we can sustain that, because that's part of the independent game scene, which we see as very important for a number of reasons, which I'll come on to. What am I supposed to be pointing at? Oh, okay. Yeah. No idea. So just to give you a sense of some of the questions that we're asking. So we're looking at the kind of practices and aesthetics of the independent game sector. We're trying to bring together a group of both UK scholars but also international people who've been interested in the independent game scene, including a close collaboration with the folk behind Indiecade, who had this fantastic exhibition that took place this year that was the XYZ, the first ever exhibition of women's role in games design, which was amazing. It took place in Georgia last summer. Working with scholars and designers in Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal who have all helped to shape activity that brings together and promotes women and others as part of the design community for games through a range of different practices. So we're interested in those kind of grassroots support for a different kind of education that brings diversity to the games sector. So yeah, looking at the potential for the indie sector to transform or to help us identify or to contribute to the maturing of the games industry, that sort of sense of it being an aesthetic form that I think it was about 15 years ago someone said you're never going to weep at a game. I think that with the number of games that have come out over the past couple of years, I mean apart from frustration, I think we all weep about that, but that we're starting to see games that could make us cry, actually, and that might be a real goal that we would want from our pleasures. She said weirdly. So that would be the one thing that I remembered for saying, games to make me cry. Yeah, and I suppose this sort of new funding mechanisms is the other thing that we're interested in that's about sustaining. So we're looking at the collaborations that are made possible by the clusters themselves. So in order to kind of get there, what we're going to be doing is we're running our very first, we haven't started, we're not as far as some of them are along. Our first workshop's going to be hosted at the Bristol Games Hub that'll be examining indie game collaboration close up so that we kind of have a sense of what our template is. Because the researchers in Bristol have seen sort of over 10 years the emergence of the Bristol Games Hub from what was sort of clusters of activity into something that now seems like a real platform from which to be getting funding and to actually develop a kind of set of aesthetic principles as well. And we'll be using that to sort of compare with what's going on elsewhere and finding out why there aren't more hubs in other places. The second event will be hosted in Utrecht that will bring together academics and practitioners in the same kind of field over there, including the Dutch Game Garden. So I think they're probably in your network loosely, if not already. And then the final workshop is going to be at the Digital Cultures Research Centre back in Bristol again, which will be about engaging key creative industry organisations in dialogues concerning the viable and maturing indie game sector. So what are the funding streams? What are the conditions that we need? And then we've promised to produce a print-on-demand good hubbing guide. Those of you who haven't already seen it, the Pervasive Media Cookbook, which is sort of 12 pervasive media projects with a list of kind of ingredients, that's our sort of template, that's what we're looking for, so that by the end of a year we'll have a sense of what makes up the right ingredients to support the sector.
Thank you. I mean, I think that's particularly interesting because the background and the story of the games industry, not just in this country but worldwide, has been really rapidly in transition. And because in the old days, which was like 15 years ago, we didn't have these things and smartphones and devices, other devices that could play games. They were confined to consoles, really. And that became the big AAA, we called it, massive studios, much like the film industry, 3 or 4 years, top secrecy development cycles for games with hundreds of people. And we used to be really good at that in this country, and we still have a few fantastic studios doing that kind of thing. And that's sort of like the blockbuster titles, such as, you know, the Lego games or the Grand Theft Autos of the world. And then because of technology and because of device change and different business models and lower barriers to entry, not just economically, but in terms of skills, in terms of getting hold of tools that could allow people to program games, much like they did at the birth of our industry in BBC Micro days, you have this really rich seam of independent, fiercely independent companies who are very small and and agile. And it's a really, really fast-moving landscape at the moment, and they really do need support. Most of our games clusters are actually outside of London, and you wouldn't believe that if you just believed what Tech City tells you about software companies. So I think this is an extremely important one, but the landscape and history of the industry is quite complex. We probably don't have time to go into that today, but it is very interesting. So on to Dr. David Rosener from the University of Kent, who's going to show us a video, I believe, about Guitar Heroes in Music Education.
Indeed, and it's based on the insight that a YouTube clip speaks louder than 1,000 words. So this is going to sum up some of the key questions and challenges of this grant, and I won't say an awful lot more than what's in there. Using a print as I'm on myself. So within this research network, we will explore the different kinds of creative engagements that these different kinds of music games facilitate. We will do so with my co-investigator, Dr. Janet Cassidy from the Glasgow Caledonian University, and a group of almost 19 other network members.
There are these games called Guitar Hero and Rock Band, where you get a full-size plastic guitar and you can play along, woohoo, yeah, la, woohoo, and you can play along to your favorite rock song, yeah. Red, blue, blue, red, blue, red, blue, blue, red. Oh, difficult bit. Blue and red, blue and red.
What's fascinating about it to me was I'd never really thought about the idea that the way you move is as much a signature as the way you sing or the way you play.
You get into these deeply philosophical questions about how people consume media as technology evolves, and you sort of look at the way that people listen to CDs or records before that, and the way they're listening to MP3s, and the way remix culture is affecting the way that people interact with music, and really work with artists who want to give their music out to players to do fun, interesting things with, and who knows what the future holds, but there are a number of artists that are releasing content out in ways that are deeply accessible to creative people, and I feel like we're trying to tap into that form of media consumption.
Inspires you. I'm just gonna break out this gear thing. Like the juicy, tasty little notes.
And what's so great about Sound Shapes is it's so simple. As you platform through these levels, the music interacts. They have artwork done from different artists, and there's music from different artists like Deadmau5 and Beck and other people that are famous that I never really listened to before the game.
To help answer these and many more questions, we've assembled a group of academics, musicians, composers, game designers, and entrepreneurs. These include Kiri Miller, who's an ethnomusicologist at Brown University in the US, Karen Collins, who's the Canada Research Chair in Interactive Audio at the University of Waterloo, Tim Summers, who's a musicologist at St Catherine's College at Oxford University and co-founder of the Game and Music Research Group, Jan Sežnek, who's the founder and director of the game design company Lucky Frame, and Frank Fitzpatrick, who's a Hollywood creative, music producer, filmmaker, composer, and creativity consultant. We will disseminate our research findings in a variety of ways, including conference papers, articles, book chapters, and public events. We also have a blog, and you're more than welcome to have a look at that and to leave comments and to get in touch.
Thank you.
Yes, not much to add. We've tried to cram it all into that, and I don't want to repeat it. I think that just to say 2 words in addition is one thing we're trying to really sort of widen the scope of what to look at. I think when we say music-based games, a lot of people think of Guitar Hero and the likes, and as you could see, the scope is much wider. There are a range of different games, and we'll try to explore how each of them potentially facilitates creativity, interaction, learning opportunities, etc. And the other thing is really to sort of triangulate all these different games from different academic and different practical experiences, from composers and musicians to game designers to music psychologists, music pedagogists, I don't know if that's a word.
It is now.
It is now, thank you. To theatre and performance scholars who've got like myself, who've got a different approach to that altogether. I think that's probably all I want to say.
I will ask you some more. I think it's fascinating. If no one has played Guitar Hero or Rock Band, do. Especially the Lego one's quite cool. I am brilliant on the drums, just saying. Just if you need someone.
We've got the drums upstairs, so you may call you too.
I love the plastic hitting. It's just fantastic. Anyway. And so, Gregor, I'm going to come to you next from Abertay University, which has the best and the first games course ever. Also, the birth of the cradle of our industry in this country. If Scotland gets independent, I am half Scottish. Then I plan to move to Berwick, I think, so that I can have the best of both worlds. But Gregor's going to talk about the video games in the museum project.
Yeah, I think there's a variation of the bridge in there somewhere. Just halfway across. Hello, I'm Gregor White. I'm from the School of Arts, Media and Computer Games at Abertay University and principal investigator on this project, Video Games in the Museum. It's a partnership with the V&A here in London and a number of other partners. And I suppose the kind of high-level challenge that we're looking at with the project is to work with an industry which, as Joe mentioned, is incredibly economically successful, commercially confident, but when it comes to its sort of cultural position, it's still quite tentative and insecure about its place in the history of design and the history of creative practice. So the project really is kind of engaging with that issue there to try and work with some of the pillars of the pantheon, V&A being one of them, to look at the kind of the cultural history of the development practice and the cultural position of the phenomenon of games. So I suppose our first challenge was to pull together a partnership or a network that would allow us to address some of the issues that suggests. So between the V&A and MIT Press, I think we've got 2 of the legitimizing organizations that the games industry can work with quite well. PlayStation First is kind of Sony's academic project, and Microsoft Studios are both involved as the kind of major technology providers for the sector. We've spoken a little bit about the diversification of platforms, but in terms of console gaming, Sony and Microsoft are still the 2 big players in there. UK and Tiger, with the sort of trade bodies in the UK, and give us kind of access into most of the development studios in the UK across that range of AAA studios right down to very small independent studios. So we're really hoping to kind of engage with that sector from top to bottom in this project. Academically, we're working with the University of Southern California as our international partner, very highly regarded games department in University of Southern California, and very highly regarded research academics over there. And Euchroma, which is a consortium of European games programs, 8 universities across sort of Scandinavia, Mediterranean, and all points in between. So, like Scott, I think we've taken a big bite with this project, but we're riding on a lot of interest in the area and a lot of current activity that's going on. We have a huge number of objectives, I think, which I shall kind of gloss over. And there's really kind of 3 main areas that we're interested in. There's a sort of curatorial approach. How do museums collect games? What is collectible? What's archivable? What's preservable? A lot of the history of games development is already lost to technology, lying in floppy disks in attics around the world. Some of it's not recoverable. So we're looking to try and better understand what the challenges around about curation of a form that covers a lot of different areas as well. So there's that sort of design tradition, there's design practice, the design process within the studios. It's very difficult to see, very difficult to expose just with the final product. There's also that it's a performed experience. So how do you collect objects or artifacts that kind of then translate into an understanding of the experience of the player playing the game? So it's a really interesting challenge there about how we understand mechanics, how we understand the experience of the player, and what are the actual things that we can collect and reproduce and show to try and communicate those ideas. The other area that we're really interested in is the creative traditions of the medium. So, how do we talk to ourselves? How do we talk to each other? How do we talk to the public? There's a great deal of sort of diversity of approach to describing games development, and it's almost like what the V&A would call a vernacular. It can be quite close to or local to individual studios, the way that they describe how they work and how they communicate with each other. So there's a challenge there of creating or establishing or beginning to establish a kind of common language that we can use to communicate the ideas and the aspirations and the processes of the industry. And the final one, of course, is the kind of public perception of games, which as you know, the Daily Mail has a particular attitude to, but it tends to have been quite sort of tabloid focused in terms of the way that the public understand games and some of the issues that come out of age and addiction and the kind of content that sometimes appears in games.
Which is all unscientific, by the way.
Indeed. So, how the public sees the sector, how the public sees the content, and again start to find ways of sort of historicising that, placing it in context, and representing it back as a kind of cultural phenomenon. So these are the areas that we're really trying to look at. We have a number of workshops which will kind of follow these themes through. In the V&A, I've managed to find an institution that moves even more slowly than universities, so it's quite an interesting challenge. April is our latest deadline for the first event in the V&A in London, and again that's really looking at we've sort of used the hoary old chestnut of appropriating language from games to theme these events. So LAG is really looking at that the idea of a feedback loop. The museum is an interface that what happens when you press the button and send the signal and what comes back from that. So it's a really interesting idea that we're looking to explore in the first instance. In Dundee, in August, we're looking at that idea of unpacking the traditions, the creative practice within the studio, so breaking it up into art practice, design practice, audio composition, level design user experience, and start to look at trying to locate creative practice in studios into a kind of broader tradition that that the V&A does so very well, and sort of create these sort of taxonomies and typologies of practice. Los Angeles in March. You're all invited.
We're coming.
Indeed. So USC will be organising that event this time next year, and again, it's looking at the sort of pervasiveness of play and the pervasiveness of games technology and games processes and mechanics into the digital sphere. So games development often leads innovation in terms of interface and interaction and ways of living your life digitally. So that's really the focus of that one. And we shall have a public event back in the V&A in June next year, which will be a dissemination event and hopefully quite a large public event where we will disseminate some of the findings of the project. What's not on that timetable is the V&A's intention to host a major exhibition of games in 2016-2017, which will, again, hopefully have some of the outputs of this project. So what we're looking to do out of the workshops is kind of send out some challenges to the wider community. We'd really like to see academics, artists, games developers, museums and curators working together to kind of respond to some of these ideas and come back with prototypes or ideas for exhibits that might make their way into this the exhibition 2017.
I think it's fascinating because I think it's an absolute crime that public institutions have not engaged with games as much as they should do, because they're naturally active systems, and they are systems in which you learn, and they are also systems in which you can hook people who might not be interested in something and engage them in an issue. And by playing, you're thinking about thinking. So I think the public institutional, in terms of museums and galleries and those kinds of public spaces, have a lot to gain from this project. So finally, our professor, Elizabeth Wood from Sheffield University, talking about developing video games and play for hospitalised children and the project she's doing in that.
Is this the only slide I was left with? Has this been edited down to one slide?
No, I think there's...
Oh, no, okay,
there's some more.
Thank you. Okay, I'm Elizabeth Wood. I'm working with my colleague who's here, Dr. Dylan Yamada Rice. We are from the School of Education at the University of Sheffield. This project feels very specific compared to some of the other ones. It arose through quite a chance conversation at the Children's Media Conference last year when we got talking to some hospital play specialists about how being hospitalised, being in a recovery space, changes the nature of children's experiences and obviously changes the nature of their play. So our project is focusing on developing what is very much an emerging network here about the creative potential for developing video games for hospitalised children. It brings together my own research and Dylan's research, because we're also working on how children are blending digital and traditional forms of play, and we're very much interested in this emerging and very creative space. We have got 3 strands of membership, and we have got 4 workshops. Our first workshop involves the hospital play specialists. What has already emerged from our informal meetings is the importance of knowledge exchange. This is such a specialised space that the hospital play specialists are already bringing those really valuable insights to the video games developers and the artists and designers that we're working with, to understand what those spaces are like and what children's experiences are like, what is possible and what is not possible within some of those hospital spaces. Our second workshop will be led by the academics who are researching different types of play. Our research focuses on children's freely chosen, expressive and creative play, and we are particularly interested in understanding how children can actually sustain free choices in their play when they are in hospital places. Oh, right, sorry, that shouldn't be there. Okay. Our third workshop is going to be led by the video games developers and the artists and designers, and that's where we will come together to look at how the arts and humanities, and particularly arts-based approaches, can inform the development of early prototypes of video games, then everybody is going to come together in our fourth workshop, and that is where we will start to think about how we can represent our experiences as a network and how we can represent those experiences to take forward into the next stage, hopefully into another project as well. We've represented this tension between what we've identified as three different modes or types of play for children in hospital. Education and therapeutic play is often supported by adults, and it has adults' intentions behind it. There are lots of apps to help children and young people to communicate about their pain levels, about their treatment, and to inform children of their particular condition and help them to learn more about it so that they can be in control of it. But this is fairly typical of the way in which adults can capture children's play. They do it a lot in schools and preschool settings as well. So hence why our third area is the area that we particularly want to focus on, and that is how do we sustain freely chosen play activities that combines the traditional and digital forms of play. We want to be able to bring to children interactive games that help them to sustain and inspire their role play and imagination, that enable them to continue to communicate with their friends, with their families, and with their own communities. And the final thing that came out from conversations with the hospital play specialist is how much children are involved in issues of death, gore, and dying. And that made us think about how often sometimes we don't want to engage with children around issues that we find difficult as adults. So we're hoping to understand how children want to engage with, well, where does your leg go if it gets cut off in a hospital? And where does all the blood come from, and what do you do with it? So we feel that this is a very, very exploratory network. We think it's exciting. We've brought together some really exciting and forward-thinking partners, but we are working mainly with the creative industries in Sheffield, and we're working with small indie games developers at the moment because we wanted to keep this small scale and to be stimulating the local creative economies in Sheffield. So that's our project in a nutshell. I think that's it. Oh, I wanted to leave you with this because whenever we talk about play, people will always say to me, so how are you defining play? And we'd kind of be here for another week if we started on that. So this is for me, these are some of the essences of play that we really want to try to both create and preserve when children are in hospital and recovery spaces. So we want them to sustain opportunities for play that will sustain the conjuring of possibility and not just adults' understandings of what play should be for them in those spaces. Okay.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much.
I think it's astounding as well the way that we do treat play as adults. You know, even in school environments, the playground is the place where you don't do learning, which is just very weird. So we've got 10 minutes left of this session, so I will open up to the floor to some questions. But first of all, I guess to Scott and David, why are games particularly powerful in either tackling kind of issues or in learning environments? And I guess Elizabeth, in terms of this project as well, you know, what is it about games we think that make them powerful systems?
Well, first, there are a lot of shit games out there that purport to do this but don't. So I think we shouldn't make or I wouldn't want to make sweeping statements about games per se. My personal take on it is that we're kind of used to a lot of storytelling devices that can touch us in really profound ways, and other times we don't. It's not really our bag or whatever, so we can choose to turn the page or to switch off. I think the thing with the potential with games is that we've got we can kind of become complicit with what's going on, and we can take on things like other roles and that sort of role play and what have you. And that's really interesting because I think it can engage people who may otherwise turn an eye. So you're getting really interesting discussions around migrant workforces and that sort of thing in Sweatshop and whatever, which may have been a closed book. And I think Yeah, so I think games and storytelling are fairly closely aligned to one another, and my kind of understanding with the games is that by us having an experience, then we've got a new story to tell or to share it. So, yeah.
And I think I would chime with that, Scott, in the sense that it is about young children exercising choice and agency, being in that liminal, almost existential space that they can control, and they can exercise their imaginations and choose who they want to be. And it's sustaining that, those choices when they are in recovery spaces, I think that I would agree with. An issue for us, though, is understanding what it is like to be a 4-year-old or a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old. So many games are almost a simple version of an adult game, and I don't think that's good enough for young children. We have to have a deep understanding not of what children are like, as well as what life is like for children if they are in hospital and recovery spaces. So we need to really be pushing those boundaries of knowing about children to make good games and not shit games.
Yes.
To add from my perspective on the music games, I think it's certainly about lowering thresholds. It's about sort of accessibility, and it's an environment which is not dominated by the teacher or the parent. It's sort of pure learning, and in some respect, it's almost like fast forwarding to the point of where making music is fun. Because of course, if you play the violin, you spend a year just trying to sort of get your intonation just about right, and that's really frustrating for a child. Here, within 2 minutes, 3 minutes, you're creating something that sounds reasonably well, depending on the game, and it kind of allows you sort of a glimpse into, sort of that satisfaction, that kind of identification with either a music-making character or with someone who is creative in that environment, and allows that in a reasonably accessible form, and I think that's can be a very good entry point for learning.
So it's a fantastic way of creating environments, safe environments, without fear of kind of retribution, if you like, for learning. Patrick, with your project, I mean, in terms of how these kinds of bits of research are going to impact industry itself, how do you think that's going to happen in your project?
Yeah, I think, the kind of the use of movement-based interfaces, physical interfaces, is still... It's been implemented in terms of game design in a very, I think, very direct and perhaps simplistic way, in the way that game designers are not used to dealing with the projection of the game world into the physical world. They're kind of used to designing virtual worlds, not so much in physical worlds. So you can find examples of kind of dance games or tennis games where it's about replicating moves, but there's no real consideration of the difference between different players' abilities. So Catherine's work's very interesting from that point of view in terms of mobility and people having impaired mobility. So how do you design for players who have very obvious limitations compared to other players, and create an experience that's useful for everyone? So I think there's still, it's really, in terms of game design, that's still very much in its infancy, and designers haven't really gone very far into exploring the ideas of performance and physicality in games.
It's interesting, because one of my favourite games of recent years was a company called Something Else, who we worked with at Channel 4 quite a lot, and they, out of games made for visually impaired people, they made a fantastic game called The Nightjar, and Papa Sangre was the first one, and it's an audio game, it's a video game without video, which is fantastic, and that's grown out of this field. So it'd be incredibly interesting to see what innovation comes out, I think. Very, very valuable. Gregor, you mentioned that the industry is quite confident commercially, but not necessarily culturally. Why is that? And I guess, Helen, in terms of the indie side of the sector, what's the issue there, do you think? Is that because of the public perception?
I think that's a big part of it, and self-perception as well. There's a lot of myths that attract people to the games industry as a career, and stories of of staying up all night and eating pizza and.
You mean that doesn't happen?
It does happen. Whether we should encourage it or not is a different question, I suppose. So I think that there is a kind of maturing process that the industry is going through, and I think it kind of reached a high watermark probably with that sort of AAA when the consoles were dominant. These kind of myths became sort of part of the folklore. I think it's refreshing to see a rebirth of indie game studios doing much more exciting creative things and attracting the attention of cultural organisations and cultural commentators in a way that maybe Blockbuster Games hasn't done. We've seen a lot of exhibitions fairly recently. Game On, I suppose, was the first one, but Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Smithsonian exhibitions in Seattle and in Australia, which, and again, it's a little bit a kind of arcade-style exhibition, so they're kind of presenting the finished product again. So most people have that collection of games in their attic at home. If you're my age, you probably do.
But it kind of looks back rather than forward.
Yeah.
And museums, history is created just a second ago, right?
Yeah. But I think that historicising of the practice will bring some confidence to the practitioners now and encourage more creative, more experimental approaches to game making and see the cultural sector both as a output for their games and as the subject of them.
Yes. Helen?
I think, so there's such a lot to say in response to that, Joe.
Sorry.
I think Gregor's touched on a big chunk of it, but also this is an industry that has tended to produce quite a narrow bandwidth of content in terms of the sorts of stories that have been told, etc.
That has changed over the last few years, though, certainly, hasn't it?
It definitely has. And so that is changing, and that's, I think the indie scene does some lovely work in contributing new kinds of stories, etc. I think last year was a real watershed moment for exposing some of the sexism that pervades in the industry that has sort of helped to perpetuate the way that it's seen as a bit of a closed shop for women, so therefore, and also others. So the different games conference that took place in New York last year that was part of, I think, sort of 3 big major events that sort of exposed some of the problematic elements of the games industry. And it's not just sort of the content, but the industry practices, but even if you went to a conference as a woman, you might get your bottom pinched or your boobs tweaked in 2013, not 1983. So, so there are things like that sort of perpetuate and support that kind of story of games as somehow adolescent, because that does seem like very adolescent, immature type of behaviour. So no matter how many brilliant indie games you have, as long as that's seen as the pervasive kind of territory, then that's difficult to get any critical purchase on and to change.
Well, hopefully, the projects, I've been told I do need to stop now, unfortunately, because I could literally talk about this for hours. I love this industry and I love my job, and I'm so glad that these research projects are happening, and please keep in touch. And if you have any other questions, please ask the panel afterwards. Thank you very much.